As I started to write about curiosity, I realized it wasn't enough to write about it. I got curious about what stops it.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Cash Flow Podcast. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, it's Augustino. Curiosity is a skill that every entrepreneur needs to be successful. It is the trademark for those that make the biggest change in the world. It's curiosity, asking the questions and not settling for just how things are, but rather digging deeper into further understanding problems and then, of course, solving them, or maybe even finding opportunities to innovate as well. So our next guest understands all this. She is an absolute expert when it comes to emotional intelligence and behavioral science. She is a nationally syndicated radio host and has interviewed hundreds of experts in this field, including billionaires, multimillionaires, people that have had success. And she's always found this trait when it comes to curiosity is one of those things that are very much a constant in those sorts of people. Now, she's authored multiple books as well, including Cracking the Curiosity Code and The Power of Perception. Both books you definitely need to check out. Now, as a CEO of Tonerra and the co-founder of DIMA Innovations, her group, they help teams and organizations innovate and boost productivity. So with all that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Diane Hamilton to the show. Diane, thanks for coming on.
Oh, well, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
I think so too. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Now, if you love what Diane has to say, and I'm sure you will, check out her website at drdianehamilton.com. You can also check out the website curiositycode.com, which is a reference to her book. So you can also check out too. So, Dr. Diane, thanks again for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. Now, let's just open it up with, why is curiosity important? Why should people care about being curious?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And thank you again for having me. I think it's such an interesting discussion to talk about curiosity, because a lot of people will ask me, how do you define it? Why did you study it? Why is it important? And they all kind of tie into, like you, I have my own show and I've interviewed so many people, and I started to recognize a certain quality of people who were successful. And I tried to put my finger on why were these people so much different than maybe some of the students I'd had who kind of wanted me to give them the fish instead of teach them to fish, right? And so I was wanting to get past that. And I started thinking, well, they're just super curious and I'd love to write about curiosity. And as I started to write about curiosity, I realized it wasn't enough to write about it. I got curious about what stops it. So that led to my interest in developing an assessment that determined the factors that inhibit curiosity. So I got interested in this, and it was more about status quo thinking, I found, is what was holding people back. And that's really what curiosity, helps you overcome. And if you can get over the things that inhibit you, get past the roadblocks, then you get out of status quo thinking. And so curiosity to me is just taking a look at what interests you, of course, but also things that make you innovative, engaged, motivated, driven. And I guess I kind of look at it as the spark to just about anything you want to fix in the workplace. I sometimes liken it to baking a cake. Say you want to bake a cake, and you've got all these ingredients, right? And you mix them all together, your eggs and your flour and your, everything's in this mixture, and you put it in the oven and you hope that it's going to give you cake. Well, you put it in the oven. If you don't turn on the oven, you don't get cake. And that's the same thing with curiosity. You've got all these ingredients. Everybody knows it's important. We want innovation, engagement, motivation, drive, any of the soft skills you talk about. All these things are all the ingredients. People are mixing them all together. They're putting them in the oven, so to speak, but nobody's turning on the oven. And that oven spark is curiosity. So if we can work on these things, we can become more innovative. So it all ties into your word of mindset, which, I studied Carol Dweck's work and many others to get some more information when I was writing this. And mindset is a big part of it, of whether you have a growth or a fixed mindset. And a lot of it is not just labeling, do we have this, do we have that, but how can we fix it? How can we get it back? And that's what I wrote about.
Just by you saying that, it's almost like I'm trying to put the finger on what is that thing, that je ne sais quoi, as they say in French, right? What is that thing that really makes a difference between the smart people and the smart people actually, I guess, try to dissect and then push something over the line? Taking that baking the cake, for example, it's like I'm thinking about it. It's like, why doesn't this cake bake? Well, simple. The power's not on, or the button's not pressed, right? It almost seems like curiosity may be that tipping point. I mean, would you say that, or does it go beyond that into something more emotional intelligence? I don't know if that comes into play here, or is curiosity that thing that really that hold up that really prevents people from taking action or from excelling at whatever it is they want to do?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I wrote my dissertation on emotional intelligence. I've had Daniel Goleman and others who are emotional intelligence experts on the show. And the emotional intelligence, leadership, collaboration, engagement, all those things, those are the ingredients. So the spark really to get these things, to develop these things. And we know you can develop emotional intelligence. And we know it's costing us tens of billions a year to have problems with emotional intelligence. So yes, it's the part of the process. If we can spark our curiosity, if we can learn to be more inquisitive, and all that builds empathy. Empathy is a big part of emotional intelligence. And you'll hear a lot of people talking about empathy. And it was fun to talk to Daniel Goleman on my show, because, I studied his research to write my doctoral dissertation. And so here I have the expert, and he's like, yeah, curiosity is the big thing of the future. It's like the thing that, he thinks younger generations are much more likely to explore that. And because they're asking more questions than we did in maybe the boomer generation. And that's just a cultural change that we're seeing. And all of that really kind of led into my interest, because later I wrote about perception, because I look at perception, that I co-authored in my book with Dr. Maya Zelahich. We looked at it as kind of a combination of EQ, IQ, CQ for curiosity quotient, and CQ for cultural quotient. And so, especially if you're talking to salespeople, your perception, if you only see things from one vantage point, then that's a real problem. We have to develop our empathy. It's that there's the interpersonal skills between each other, but you have to have that intrapersonal, that self-awareness, and all that ties into our reality of what we experience. And if you're in the sales field, which I've been in for decades, I've sold everything from pharmaceuticals to, lending and, subprime, you name it. I've been in every kind of sales. And a lot of people just don't recognize how important the questions are to find out where to even direct conversations. And that questioning, that curiosity, when people feel that from you, they think, they know that you care, that you're interested in finding out their problems and finding their solutions. So that's a big part of the communication aspect of what makes really successful people. And to develop that mindset requires to discover the things that hold you back.
So I guess the real question then becomes, is that something that can be learned? Is it possible for someone, like say someone goes to you and they want you to mentor them? Mm-hmm. We have a mentoring program, same sort of thing. And one of the biggest things I find is that they don't either ask the questions or they don't care to ask the questions, which brings about it's probably more of emotional intelligence than anything else in that regard. But it sounds to me like if they're able to consistently spark their curiosity, they'll get ahead. They'll proceed. But can curiosity be taught? I mean, is that something that can be taught to someone?
Well, it's so interesting, because that's when I started to write the book. I thought, well, I need to fix this for people who have issues with curiosity, who don't care enough to ask the questions or So what I did was, for years, I studied and thousands of people gave all these surveys to find out, what are the things that keep people from being curious. And I found there are 4 things. So if you can work on those 4 things, that's what I do. I train organizations. I go and I give them my assessment, which is kind of like taking a DISC or Myers-Briggs or something. If you've taken a personality test, it's 10 minutes, you get a PDF, and it gives you your results of how these 4 factors and the sub-factors within those factors, how they impact your curiosity. And so, yes, you can improve. It's like emotional intelligence. Once you find it where your baseline is, then you can work on developing it from there. But if you don't recognize what's holding you back, it's hard to move forward. And that was why my work got nominated by Thinkers 50 Radar, which I was really honored because, this is a very unique thing. There's never been an assessment like that in the world. So that is why it's taken off so well. I've been working with companies like Novartis and Verizon, and it was doing a lot of traveling until all the COVID situation, doing a lot with different companies, but a lot of them are doing it virtually, and it's easy to do it virtually because we can train individuals to learn their profile to find out what kinds of things are stopping them, and then once you find out what stops you, you can create do a kind of a personal SWOT analysis of your weaknesses and your threats and those types of things to create measurable action items to improve them. But a lot of people just take for granted that, I'm not a curious person or whatever. And everybody's curious. The reason people say that sometimes is because we all peak around age 5. We get this super level of curiosity. The kids are saying, why? And then it just tanks after 5 years old. And by the time we're in our 30s, it's very low. So it was really fascinating to find out what kept us from being curious. So I'm sure you're curious if you haven't looked at my stuff already. the 4 things, right?
That's right.
The 4 things that hold us back from being curious is the acronym is FATE, F-A-T-E, to help you remember it. And it's fear, assumptions, which is really the voice in your head, what you tell yourself, technology, over and underutilization of it, and environment, which is basically everybody you've ever had any interaction with. And so looked at a lot of those things to get an idea of how can we overcome. I think a lot of it is really fun when we go through the training is just, I don't like that because I tell myself this, or this person had said that, or, when you look at fear, for example, and it's kind of different for men and for women sometimes in some of the studies I've seen, and even in mine, it was slightly different, but women are less likely to ask questions in an Oxford study they showed after watching a seminar. They're less likely to point out that they see something wrong in what the speaker said, or they're less likely to ask questions right away. They need like 6 or more questions. It's just a different level of confidence sometimes with women, maybe because of how long we've been in the workplace compared to men, or different things like that. But there is a difference in the kinds of things that that will hold people back. But in general, they were really close, men and women, in just about every aspect that I studied. It wasn't a huge difference. And it was fear is the kind of thing that if you've had a boss who said, don't come to me with problems unless you have solutions, or, things that sounded good that leaders were trying to do because they thought they didn't want whiners. And it did sound like a good thing to say. But what it does is tell people, well, if you're not qualified to give me, solutions, I don't want to hear about problems. And so people just shut down when they get people around them that say, don't do this, don't do that, don't ask this, don't ask that. And Francesca Gino was on my show, who's an amazing mind from Harvard. And she has a great HBR piece about the case for curiosity. And we talked about that, and a lot of leaders really think that they're promoting curiosity in their workers when actually they're not doing as much as they think they are. And employees' perception, we're back to perception again, of it is not that they have this sense of safety, the psychological safety. So Francesca Gino is talking about that. And so is Amy Edmondson, another Harvard professor, talking about psychological safety quite a bit. She brings up that, the things that help us work and collaborate in teams and all that is this ability to be curious and to overcome this sense of fear, that we have to become humbled to ask questions. That's why in her great TED Talk, she talked about how we got the miners out from the rock in that horrible Chilean miner disaster, that curiosity led to everybody, biting it up and realizing, we don't have to be afraid. We have to ask questions because these people are going to die. So we have to think like that in everyday life. We have to recognize that, you fear 85%, whatever the statistics are always made up, right? That of everything that you think is going to happen bad doesn't ever really happen. So we have to recognize how much our fears are keeping us from asking questions. Because I think as leaders, if you're in a meeting and no one's asking questions, that's not a good thing. And a lot of leaders will go, oh, good, everybody figures it out. But instead, it's really maybe not that. That's so right. That's fear. I would say, assumptions can be offshoot from fear. Then what do we tell ourselves? Oh, I can't go to that guy because he's told me, I don't want to hear that. Or, we have to not talk so much in meetings, or whatever that people have said to them might have shut them down. We make these monologues in our heads of, well, I took that as a kid. I never really liked it. Or the last person I called on as a salesperson told me he didn't like my product, so I know he's not going to like it this time. I was in pharmaceutical sales. I went to go shake a guy's hand, and he said, "Don't touch me." And I was 23 thinking, what I do, he just hadn't washed his hands. There's things that we make these assumptions that it's something so bad, right? And we assume we're not going to be interested. We assume they're going to not like our product. And that'll come up with perception as well, because when it comes to sales, I gave a little story in the perception book about a couple going in, partners, sales partnership, going into an office where the guy came out just going, "Oh, that was brutal. They just tore us apart. this is like the worst day of my life that I had to go through that." Where his partner, she's like, "That was the best presentation. We learned everything we can fix. It's just great. Now we know how to sell to the next people. They did us a hugest favor." So that what you tell yourself dictates what you do next. And that's why we have to look at our assumptions. It's such a huge issue.
That's huge there, by the way, too. The story you tell yourself is it narrates your entire life. And many people underestimate that, too.
They really do. And I think a lot of it is what you grow up around and who's told you things that you repeat. We have our confirmation biases and all these things that we just keep buying into the same thing, right? So I think this is really important to recognize. And I just to touch on the last two, so you can ask some questions. I don't mean to hog the conversation.
No, go ahead.
The technology is an over and underutilization of just technology in general, because sometimes you might be the greatest mathematician in the world. I throw you a calculator. You don't know the math behind it. You may never go to explore it. You utilize this, and it's just something that you don't have the foundation, right? And so we have to get that foundational understanding of technology. And then once we know that, then great, use it as much as we can to the fullest advantage we can. And that's what we hope to have. So I think that there's a lot of people who have a great background with understanding the foundation. I met Steve Wozniak, and I like his book, I Was, where his dad would sit with him when he came home when he was a little kid and give him all these gadgets from work, and teach him that this wire goes here because it brings electricity. And he gave him all the background of why the curiosity was developing about technology, and look at where it led him, right? And so that kind of ties into his environment. So some of these overlap, right? His family promoted this curiosity. My father promoted curiosity because we had to play games at the table every night. We played school. You play these different things to ask questions. And I think that if you have a family or a teacher or some, different people can go one way or another with you. If you have teachers who have to teach to the test and they want to answer your questions, but they can't, then that can shut you down. You have social media that if you post something people don't like, that can shut you down. It's just every friend, everybody you've ever worked for, the boss that told you don't ask, questions or don't come to me with problems. All those things tie into the overall how curious I am thing. And if you don't recognize those things, if you don't write it down, look at it, think about it, how to overcome it, you just keep going in the same lemming fashion and you don't ever fix anything.
There's so much to unpack there. So
I know.
Sure.
I gave it all in one lump sum.
No, but that's good though. That's good because as you're speaking, I'm going over all this. It's kind of like there's so much that takes place. Everything from the boss to what you see on social media to what you're telling yourself. And it sounds to me though that curiosity is certainly super important to, I guess, dissect the problem and take genuine interest in what someone else is going through or how to help someone or even how to help yourself for that matter. But even before that, it almost seems like you need to get control of yourself, it seems, right? Because it sounds like it's so easy to succumb to the problems that the outside world is putting on you, for instance, like in the case of social media, or in the case of the boss, or a spouse, or whatever else might be happening in your life.
Right.
And I mean, would you say that's probably a little more important too?
Well, it's
getting your hands around that, or
I think that's why we do the assessment, because that's you getting an awareness. It's that self-awareness of what it is that's holding you back. And once you have that knowledge, then you can work on the outside factors that have caused these issues. And I think that the self part is that we don't recognize it. We don't have that in our minds that this is a problem. And once you train some of these courses and you see people get these like, oh, that's what, my sibling, my brother, he was horrible. He wouldn't let me do this or that, or whoever your my friends all like to do this, so that's why I did that. Or, you look at some of these things and you find out, well, that I always liked that as a kid, but nobody really wanted me to do that because everybody in my family was a lawyer. Everybody was a doctor. Everybody was whatever. And you've got these reasons now of what might have set you on a different path than maybe your most cherished path. And, having Doug Conant on my show was really insightful, just because he's the one who turned around Campbell's Soup when their engagement was horrific. And he brought it up dramatically because he used curiosity to ask people about themselves, to find out more about them. And then he wrote 30,000 handwritten notes and all the things he did that are in all the case studies of how great he was. And those kinds of things, to find out what motivates people, to find out what's interesting to them, to find out more about people, really is so critical, especially in sales. When I was in pharmaceuticals, I had a boss who would just look around the room, and he was really good at this. He would see whatever diploma they got or wherever they were from. He knew the sports teams from wherever that was, or he knew whatever this person I called on's thing was. And he'd ask questions about that. And I always thought, wow, that's really, he was very observant. And really, he was curious. He was very interested in finding out more, because it led to opening up the conversation. And in sales, if you just dive in and you don't find out more, then, you're just going to sell something that maybe isn't, even if you're selling benefits and not features and you've gotten past that, you might be selling the wrong benefits. And it's all about questioning and getting to what it is that their pain point, or if you may not even have a customer that's even the right customer for you. And so I teach a lot of sales and marketing. I still teach for a lot of different universities. And when I was the MBA Program Chair at Forbes School of Business, I looked at incorporating a lot of these kind of tactics into a lot of these courses, because these are the soft skill type of things that's the glue, I think, that holds everybody together in the education realm. We want to be critical thinkers. To do that, you have to ask questions. You have to explore. And that's where a lot of people don't.
Right. It's funny because just yesterday, a gentleman that I know, he actually works for one of our property management groups. And he calls me up, and I had him quote a job. Mm-hmm. He immediately opens up with, I can't reduce my price. I don't know what the price is, right? I can't reduce my price. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't cut the hours. I said, oh well, okay. Tell me about what you want to do. Uh-huh. And so he then went through this list of items, and I said, well, listen, your pricing is definitely too high, but I'm going to help you out with something else. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Solve my problem. You have to open up with how are you going to help them? What's important to the other person? That's first and foremost. And how does your solution solve their problem? And it sounds so basic, but once you have that curiosity of like finding out, hey, what is their issue and how do you solve that issue? It almost won't matter to them the amount of money, if of course, within reason, of course, that you're going to help them, and the quality. You can talk about the quality of your work afterwards, but it's so funny how it's curiosity. I think 100%, and all curiosity is probably the first and foremost of taking genuine interest in the other person, and how are you going to solve their problem? yeah,
well, it's really interesting because one of my first pharmaceutical sales calls, I was early 20s. I mean, I was just so young, and I was so scared to call on this doctor because I was told, oh, he's never going to give you more than a couple minutes. So you have to get in 3 products. You have to talk all 3 products, and they call them details. You had to detail them on all 3 products. And if you do not do that, oh, you're somehow a failure, and they would put you through this horrible training where they videotaped you and make sure you got all these presentations out, and it was so unrealistic because the doctor would be really nice and answer your questions. And in real life, you knew that was never going to happen. And so you've got all these things in your head. Talk about assumptions. You're just sitting there in the doctor's office going, oh, this is going to be awful. It's going to be awful. Right. So I remember that I was in this one doctor's office, and he finally called me back. It took forever. And I got in there, and all I remember is I got through all 3 products. And I never thought in a million years that would ever happen. Right. And I was so excited. And I walk out of the office, and I'm like this, I'm walking to my elevator thinking, oh, I'm the best. I did it. And I get on the elevator, and the door is about to close. A guy gets on with me. And since I'm an extrovert, I can't go 2 floors to go down to get my samples and come back up without talking. Right. So I look at him and I go, so do you work in the building? And he looks at me and he goes, you just sold me. You just detailed me. Same guy. I didn't even look at him. I didn't even know anything about him. I didn't even see his face. I was so in my own head, worried about it and thinking it was great. That's the worst part. If that guy hadn't got on my elevator with me, I would have kept thinking I had given the best presentation ever. And so who's not getting on the elevator with you? Think about that.
You know what? This happened to me last week. I had him on the podcast, and I'm actually in Florida right now. We're recording in Florida, as opposed to our home base in Cleveland. And so he reaches out to me thinking that he knew I was in town or whatever, and I totally forgot this guy, and I went to go meet him in person. And we're carrying a conversation for like an hour and a half. And I said, your name sounds familiar. He goes, yeah, it's on your show. I was like, yeah, I think, I know what that's like.
It is hard. I've had that, and I counted because I've gotten close to 600 shows, I think. And I have more than 2 people sometimes. I have 2 people on most of the shows. So mine's over 1,000 people I've interviewed on the show. And it's something they have to, it's, you get this great rapport with people, but sometimes it's really hard to remember, especially, you get older, you start to forget people. I mean, to some extent. So as soon as I look at I have my shows are transcribed, and it's great because I can look back and I don't have to listen to the whole thing. And I go, oh yeah. That's what we talked about. And that's just the note taking, the CRM or whatever it is. You guys are going to keep track of your notes. I think in sales, you can be curious, but write it down and keep track of it because there's a lot of people you're meeting and it's easy to forget things.
Right. Now, how important is emotional intelligence in the world of sales? Because I'll tell you what, when I was working in corporate America, I was running large enterprise IT. I always thought that, as long as I do my job and as long as I treat my people well, everyone will like me and they'll get off my back and I'll get whatever budget number I need. And that's not the case. From real world experience, I totally ignored my bosses. I ignored the people at my level, so to speak. I can see that there were some issues there, but maybe back then I wouldn't even known how to begin to even use emotional intelligence to really excel at business. Like what's your take on that?
Well, when my dissertation was actually the relationship between emotional intelligence and sales performance. That's what I wrote about. So that was my main interest. I'm thinking, this is cool. And I used a EQI assessment, which isn't Goldman's, but it's another guy, Baran, had created. And it's a great assessment because I used it because I was looking at sales. It had stress tolerance in it. And I thought, that's really important to look at in these professionals. And I looked at specifically mortgage professionals because that was what I was doing at the time, working in that group. But it was for sales in general. And emotional intelligence can be developed. It's so critical. It's your intra and interpersonal skills. It's empathy. It's stress tolerance. It's all these things. It's your ability to recognize your own emotions and those in others and then act appropriately based on that understanding, right? And So in sales, if you act like an idiot in front of your client, it's going to be a problem, right? And they're not going to want to buy from you. They're going to have problems trusting you. And that's a huge issue. So I think that in sales, a lot of it is recognizing sometimes people are better at their own self-awareness of what they are than others, and sometimes it's the opposite. So taking an assessment is really critical. When I asked Daniel Goleman about it, he thought that you need a 360 evaluation to really have an accurate picture. But I think a lot of self-assessment is really helpful as well. I think you can do both. It's best if you can get a 360 evaluation, because to know what other people are thinking, it's, again, we're back to perception. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so having other people's insight is critical.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things, though, is that I often feel in today's day and age, people get really, really hurt quite easily if they get any type of criticism, right? And and I'm not sure, like, I don't want to turn it. I don't know what the problem is here, but I'll just leave it at that, right? But I mean, yeah, people seem to get really, really hurt if someone tries to offer some sort of constructive criticism.
It's how people offer it. It's the history behind how it's offered. If they've had somebody else criticize them, and you don't know what the people's backstory is. You don't know who got on the elevator with them, whatever, you don't know what happened. And so I think that that's what I was researching with the Curiosity Code Index, was to look at not only, how our fears and all that, but our backstory. That's the E, the environment. Because to really, you can tell two people the same thing and one person will freak out and the other person, so it's based on their backstory. A lot of it. It could be delivery. It could be who else has talked to them in the past. It could be they're reading into it. I have people all the time who'll send me email, go, look at what she said. She talking, and I'm reading it. It looks fine. There's no, it doesn't sound mean to me at all. And they maybe had an experience with this person where that person talked to them like that, or they had an experience with somebody else who talked to them like that, and they interpret it that way. So we're back to perception. And that's why I think, when I created the Perception Power Index, was to look at the process we go through in the perception situation. You've got this EPIC is my acronym for that. And you evaluate, you predict, you interpret, and then you correlate. And to recognize that, you have to look at all these factors of how do I see myself? How do I see you? How would you see me? And then, you have to kind of get out of your head and get into like a up in the sky visual of everything, and take their culture, their gender, everything into account, because we're just going, well, I would never act like that. Why would they? And because their parents taught them this, their culture is that, they grew up here, men might have had this experience, women might have had this experience. There's so many different things. So I think that's why you hear a lot about cultural quotients, but it's not just culture. It's every aspect of your perception. I've had so many great perception experts on my show. Bo Lotto was really fascinating. He has some great TED Talks on perception. If you get a chance, check those out. They're really great. And it's just, there's one experiment. I'm sure you've probably seen it on YouTube, where they have you watch the basketballs. They say, just watch all the hands as they pass the basketball. I think all the people in the white shirts, just watch the people in the white shirts as they pass basketball and count how many times the basketball exchanges hands, right? And you watch this and you think, well, it's obvious, this, if whatever it is, 13, 16 times, whatever it was. And then they go, well, did you notice the gorilla? And you're like, the gorilla? And then you go back and you watch it, and this guy just casually walks across in a gorilla suit, and a lot of people don't even notice him, right? And now that I've told you, you're going to notice the gorilla immediately. But if you had looked at that without knowing that, it's amazing how focused we can be on something and totally miss the bigger picture.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, there's that time that I was talking about when I was in corporate. It took a while for me to develop that perceptive attitude, so to speak, and to develop that emotional intelligence. And it took probably longer than it should have, right? Because part of it is I didn't know that it was missing out of my life. And the reason why we've been able to do what we've done in terms of acquire the number of assets that buy the Rockefeller building in downtown Cleveland, and now that's going to be a $110 million project by itself, not including all the other things that we're doing. My team and I were able to do that because we pay close attention to who we're talking to, why we're talking to them, and how do we help them achieve their success while achieving our own. And it took a while to figure all that out. And I guess here's a good question for you then. How does someone in that state right now, like maybe they're in this state, maybe they're listening to this and they're like, I think this sounds like something I might need in my life. How do they develop some of that emotional intelligence, some of that perceptive quotient, so to speak? How do they do that?
Well, it's interesting because when I was studying emotional intelligence, I thought, well, the people who need this aren't going to study this. And then I wrote about curiosity. The people who need this aren't going to read this. But then it starts to become very popular in the news. It starts to become popular from people like Daniel Goleman or Francesca Gino or people like me who are out there talking about it. Finally, people start going, well, you mean this will make me more innovative, or this will get me more promotions, or this will get, and people start seeing it from different aspects, and they think that this is really critical. So to get emotional intelligence, a lot of it is getting a baseline, and I offer EQ assessments on my site, and it's just like taking any other assessment. You take it, you get your results, and then you find it'll give you suggested ideas. This is what you need to work on. And I think that if you can work on that, I mean, all these assessments are for different things, and I have them in different areas on my site. For something like emotional intelligence and DISC and all that, it's on the bottom of drdianehamilton.com. You can go down there and look for assessments and take any of these types of assessments. You could take the perception power index. If you're working with perception, you could take the curiosity code index. All of that is on my site. But I think it's to recognize the things. I think you'll hear it as we're talking, like, oh yeah, I need to ask more questions, or yeah, my family did say a lot of things that held me back, or I wish my teachers had made me more interested in this subject or something. And as you start to recognize this, you'll go, oh yeah, it would benefit me to improve my curiosity. But to do that, I have to take an assessment to find out where it is that I need to work, because trying to fix it without knowing what's broken is what we've been doing all along. And I think that's why emotional intelligence tests became so popular for so long, because we finally recognized that we can figure out these factors. And okay, so now that I know that these are the solutions, these are the little steps I could do. I could start asking questions and developing my empathy and learn more about somebody else instead of assuming that they all like the same thing I like, for example.
Excellent. Well, we come to that point in the show where I'm going to ask you, Dr. Diane, someone's listening to this right now and they're probably wondering what to do next. What would be your one piece of bulletproof advice you'd give them?
Well, I think in sales, you cannot be as successful if you're not curious, because you will lack that empathy, you will lack that ability that pulls in those really key interpersonal skills. So I think taking a curiosity assessment, or just asking yourself, if you don't want to take a formal assessment, start with writing down fear, assumptions, technology, and environment. And how are those things holding you back from asking questions? Who was in your life who might have suggested you do something that maybe you didn't, maybe you'd like to do something else? And how much are you held back by technology being overwhelming? And could you possibly do some baby steps to learn a few things to get the foundations? And what kinds of things do you tell yourself you're not going to be interested in, or it's going to be too hard, or I'm not good enough, or it's overwhelming? And think of those kinds of things that are leading to your fear. And next time you're in a meeting, ask a question. And if you're a leader, model curiosity by saying, hey, I know I normally wouldn't ask this because we're just as afraid of looking dumb as everybody else. And hey, I would like to know, does anybody know the answer to this? And if we humble ourselves and recognize that nothing bad's going to happen if we just let loose a little bit, because that's what we need right now to be innovative and engaged. We have to recognize that that's the key. That's the spark to get in the cake that we all want. And that's where I would start. And I do offer a free curiosity course at developcuriosity.com, but you can find everything at drdianehamilton.com or curiositycode.com for the curiosity assessment. And it's really, so fun to see people explore and find out more. I get such great feedback. Love to hear from you. You can reach me and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your experiences.
Excellent. All right, guys. Hope you got some really great insight on why and how you need to develop your curiosity. If you're going to be successful in the world of real estate or any entrepreneurial venture you're working on right now, developing these key aspects are going to be important to your success. Don't forget to check out Dr. Diane's stuff. She's got great material. Like I said, one of the leaders in her industry. And check out her podcast too. She's got some great guests on there too. I've seen it. It's good stuff. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Hey, Agostino here, and I would love to connect directly with you. Text the word books to 202-410-4202 to receive weekly book recommendations from me.